Last week we did some breathing exercises, and I thought I'd speak about a new book I've been reading from a Buddhist teacher about breathing and energy, but I'll do that next week. I thought I'd raise some themes that especially the Christians at this time of year raise, that we can maybe investigate also from a Zen point of view. The first one is birth, the new birth, the birth of Jesus, etc. What is it a new birth of? We've treated the theme of birth and death many times. I think the main insight being that birth and death are at opposite poles, but life and death are not opposites. Life overshadows and includes birth and death as part of the cycle of life. That's something that Buddhism is very aware of, just as Christianity is as well. But the birth, it's of course a birth of a new way of being. As Zen says very well, die every second, never die every moment. St. Paul says, I die every day. We should be dying every second to our old way of being and seeing, and rising and being reborn, like in baptism every moment, to a new way of seeing. And that way of seeing is beautifully expressed in a poem by Mary Oliver that I got actually in a Christmas card, a Christmas letter from a friend yesterday. Mary Oliver and Denise Levertov are two modern poets that Roshi Kennedy often quotes in his teishos. And this one reflects very well what the birth of Christ really tells us is that, divine and human are form and emptiness, relative and absolute, are one. You don't have to search beyond what's right in front of you to embrace the whole of reality, or right within you to embrace the whole reality. And this expresses it very well, and comes out in love and compassion. So this is, My Work is Loving the World, is the name of the poem, the title. My Work is Loving the World, by Mary Oliver. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. You might say we're all seekers of sweetness, eh? Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums, here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? And here comes an interesting, who cares if they're old? I mean, they're as new as your perception of them. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young? For most of us, right? And still not half perfect? Big deal, and what does that even mean, right? Let me keep my mind on what matters, she says very well, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. Secret of life, and how Zen is that? The Phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture, she says, which is mostly rejoicing, since all ingredients are here. Yeah, everything is right there, joy, you have everything. Which is gratitude, she says, to be given a mind and a heart and these body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren, to the sleepy dug-up clam, telling them all, over and over, how it is that we live forever. So when you're born like this, you know that it can't be lost, that life cannot be lost. Life concludes everything. Life is forever. That's what whatever your religious tradition, that's what we experience. So that's delightful. But I thought what I'd especially investigate tonight is, New Year's is coming, and we speak about the newness of Christmas, etc., the new year coming up. What do the traditions say about new and old? We talk about an old coat or old boots. What is really old and what is really new? Now we often say, and I hope we don't say it, but it's often said, when we greet somebody, what's new? As if that's what's important. What do you mean? What do they even mean? Well, what different has happened today that didn't happen yesterday or the hour ago? And at that the danger is that that's just a superficial question to which you give a superficial answer, and then, the book of Ecclesiastes has the perfect phrase for that. Nothing new under the sun. If you're going to be on that level, it's just repetition of the same old, no matter what. So that can't be what we really mean by new. And old the same way, as I said. So what if a code is old, or you're old? Well, we're not as young. So what? I mean, we can be as new as this morning. New as our inner transformation, our perception. So that's where it really applies, right? Newness and oldness is in us, and not in our body's age, but in our spiritual age, if you will. I'm reflecting on this theme. It's quite striking, and maybe those who've been practitioners for a long time, like Richard can help me here, but it seems to me that looking at the literature, and I was going over some of it, the koans again today, Zen says almost nothing about new or old. It almost never uses the words. And I thought that was curious. For example, you speak about the elders or the patriarchs, old in that sense, the wisdom that comes from of old, but it's always about don't just follow them, but be one yourself and wake up to what they woke up to, and it's right here, new, here and now. So it doesn't matter what's old. The venerable practices and traditions are just there to help us wake up here and now. So we don't really call them old in that sense, because they're not. They're new. The new is as our perceptions can be following those traditions, and then that's the new. So the newness is in consciousness, really, and we just speak about waking up and being awake rather than newness as such. So maybe we can look at Christians use newness and oldness a lot, and maybe we can look at some of those texts and see them from a Zen's perspective at the same time. So there's a commentary by St. Augustine on Psalm 32 that we used to read in the monastery during Christmas time, and it talks about sing to the Lord a new song. So this is not the latest hit parade. You'll see what he says. Sing in his honor a new song. Strip off the old man. So this is the old consciousness, the old, human, the old creature that you were. Strip it off, like throwing off old clothes, the new song. The book of Revelation speaks about the new song that only those who are saved can sing, can learn. New man, New Testament, new song, he says. The new song is quite out of tune with the old man. It can only be learned by one who is a new man. Forgive the sexist language, but you know what we mean. Stripped by grace of his oldness and written henceforth into the New Testament of the kingdom of heaven. Towards that kingdom our heart yearns as this new song is sung. But this new song is sung not with the tongue, but with the actions of our lives. So that kind of newness of a transformed consciousness and, as we just heard, transformed actions is not just Christian, but very, any tradition, certainly Buddhist, that it's a renewed, what's new all the time is our consciousness, hopefully, and then the actions that stem from that. And that's the song of our lives. That's the song that we sing. We've put off the old ways, the old clinging and the old illusions and all those poisons that Zen speaks of. So it is really about the transformation of consciousness. Now I went to look at, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, talking about living in the now. And again, the word new doesn't come up a lot. He was talking about New Age, but still. He's talking about the mind as conditioning us, which of course is what Zen and Buddhism are all about. And this is where we can be old in the spiritual sense, which is not a good way to be. So he says, towards the end of the book, the mind, conditioned as it is by the past, always seeks to recreate what it knows and is familiar with. So that's a really good spiritual and psychological insight. We're conditioned by the past. Zen is always saying, live in the now, never mind the past and there is regrets. That's where the mind goes. If you're sitting on your cushion, the mind goes to the past and what happened today or 20 years ago, or what's going to happen tomorrow or 5 years from now. And that sort of conditioning we have to get away from. It seeks to, and especially because the mind and our lives seek to recreate what it knows, even if it's bad. The victim that recreates the victimhood continually because it doesn't know how to do anything else. That's actually what he's talking about in this section. Even if it's painful, he says, at least it's familiar. Unfortunately, that's the way we work. If we don't wake up, that old way of doing things is, even if it's painful, at least it's the way we know, and that's what the mind, is comfortable with. The mind always adheres to the known, he says. The unknown is dangerous because it has no control over it. See, the mind and the ego want control, and it doesn't have control over the unknown, so I'd rather take the painful known than the potentially wonderful unknown because I can't control it, and I can't be sure of it right from the beginning. So that's why the mind dislikes and ignores the present moment. That's the Zen present moment, to live in the present. Because if you really go into the present, you can't control it, and it's not the known that the mind can grasp. It's vast. The newness of the now. Present moment awareness, he says, creates a gap. Not only in the stream of mind, the stream of consciousness, the monkey mind, but also in the past-future continuum. So here's where the old, new thing, gets overcome. It's the now, which is always new. So the past-future thing gets overcome in the newness of the now. And that's, he concludes by saying, nothing truly new and creative can come into this world except through that gap. Otherwise, you're in your rut, and you're running around the same track like the hamster wheel. The mind, the heart, emotions, everything is stuck in the hamster wheel. Nothing new and creative can come into this world except through that gap of the space-time continuum, the eternal now. That clear space of infinite possibility, he says. Clear space, open space of infinite possibility to be reborn, to use that image again. So that's very well said. And I thought of famous quotes from St. Paul to illustrate this same thing, some of the same themes that Augustine raised a second ago. And we can comment on this too in terms of our Zen practice. So Romans 12, he says, do not be conformed to this age. Use the word schema. Do not be schematized to this age. So anytime there's a scheme, a setup, it's not going to lead anywhere because it's a construct. So don't be conformed to this age. And this age is not, well, it can be time and space only in the sense of the space, the continue, that space, space-time, the gap. Before we get into the gap there, that Eckhart Tolle was just talking about, where past and future reign in our heads and in our hearts. That's this age. So that's the way we should interpret it, not only from a Zen, from a Christian point of view. But be transformed, metamorphosed, be metamorphized, change your form, or just go deeper into the form to reach, the emptiness. Be transformed by the renewal. There it is. The renewal of your mind. So that's what needs renewing. It's your mind, or your consciousness. Better way of looking at it. So we don't get too Greek. Our mind. No, our consciousness, which is our whole being. Our mind consciousness, our heart consciousness, our body consciousness, our molecule consciousness, all of that is our consciousness. That can be renewed by being revitalized, by waking up to the moment and to our connection with it, with that and with everything. So it's about that inner transformation that helps us to connect with everything in its newness. And of course, Christians believe that Jesus brings this opportunity, brings this consciousness, as one father of the church said very well, in answer to the question, what new did Jesus bring? He brought all newness when he brought himself, because it was the perfect blend of eternal and temporal. It was this renewed consciousness of everything, which, of course, the Buddha exemplifies as well, waking up to this full consciousness of what reality is. Okay, then there are two famous passages, one from Ephesians, talking about the old man and the new man, putting off and putting on, same language we just saw in Augustine, which is, expressive, I find. So he says, put off, like putting off your old clothes, talking about old clothes, Mary Oliver. Put off according to your old way of being, the old man, being corrupted according to the desires of deceit, to deceitful desires. Now that's very Buddhist language too. So we're corrupted by deceit, illusion, deceitful desire, clinging, which is an illusion that we can control it or keep it or somehow hold on to something, which of course is just passing away. It's old, and we can't hold on to it. We're being old by trying to hold on to it. And be renewed in the spirit of your mind. So that's another way of saying it. So the spirit of your mind, the spirit including more than just your mind, but your whole being in a spiritual dimension. And put on the new man, the one created according to God, one who is awake to the absolute, surrendered to it, in justice and holiness of truth. Right? Righteousness and holiness, well, that's this kind of accurate, profound consciousness of what is and the actions that flow from it. That's what holiness and justice really are. Of truth, notice truth, the truth of things, the truth of who we really are, and the truth of what reality really is, and we're in perfect alignment with it, and the actions that flow from it, the energy that flows from that. That's Ephesians 4. And finally in Colossians 3. So put off the old man with his deeds. So there's those crazy actions of ours. And put on the new man, being renewed in knowledge, consciousness, samadhi, awakeness, pure right consciousness, being renewed in knowledge according to the likeness of the one who created. In other words, we reflect the absolute. Or it, in fact. Where, and this is important for our world today, very Christian and very Zen insight, where there is neither Jew nor Greek, circumcision or uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, slave, or free. So beyond all races and nationalities and social classes, we're one with all. And if we don't wake up to that, if we don't renew our mind to connect with that, we're neither Christians nor Buddhists nor anything except illusion, full of illusion. A lot of people out there in that boat. But where Christ is all in all. So Christ consciousness includes everything. Buddha consciousness includes everything together. And we are it. And put on, and this is the conclusion of it in Colossians and fits very well with both traditions, put on as chosen and holy and beloved the viscera of compassion. Splankna in Greek is a great word. It even sounds like your viscera. Splankna. And it's a word that comes up all the time in the gospel, where many times it says that Jesus splanknitsita, he felt great, deep, visceral compassion for the crowd that's hungry and the people who needed healing and all of that. So that should be also in both traditions, the reaction is of compassion. Your connection to everything, loving, my work is loving the world, as we just heard from Mary Oliver. That should be the result in both traditions. In all traditions that are practiced authentically, we should have that result, that we realize a connection to everything. Our renewed consciousness makes us live renewed lives in the actions that we then exercise in the world. So that's the kind of newness that we're called to. That really is new. And reality is ever new. St. Augustine also said, as you know, late have I loved you, beauty ever ancient and ever new. Ever new because it is, the eternal now is ever new. Ancient because it existed from all time, but before all time, but really it's not old because it's always now. So in a sense that's misleading. But you know what he's saying, and his way of saying eternal. And late have I loved you, he says, Sero te amavi. Well, let's not hope we don't fall into that same category ourselves. Better late than never, but better sooner. So let's sit and wake up and be renewed in the spirit of our mind.